Hi, I'm Namulanta. This podcast has always been about the letters. When I came up with the idea, I wanted something special and personal, something tangible that my daughter Coco could cherish.
Dear daughter.
Dear daughter.
My dear daughter.
Dear daughter.
Well, today on the podcast, I'm talking to Isabel Allende, who is a best-selling author, famous for writing the books House of the Spirits and City of the Beasts. She's also the queen of letter writing. When I found out that Isabel had written a book of letters to her own daughter, I thought this is exactly what my podcast is all about. This is Dear Daughter, my podcast with the BBC World Service. Episode 2, Healing Letters. Isabel Allende is from Chile and now lives in California, but today she's here on the podcast. I'm talking to her about letters she wrote to her grown-up daughter Paula after she became seriously ill with a rare condition called porphyria.
My daughter fell ill in Madrid in December of 1991, and she rapidly fell in a coma. And I was told that she would wake up, but that it was just, something that sometimes happened with the condition she had, but people recovered. So I started writing to her at the hospital.
Sadly, after nearly a year in a coma, her daughter died. And Isabel brought the letters together to form a book. In the letters, Isabel describes to Paula what is going on around her in the hospital. She talks about her fears and her hopes for her daughter, mixed in with stories from their family.
I started writing about the things that I thought would be important for her to remember that she might forget, because I was told that people who are in a coma for some time, that when they wake up, they have these big parts of memory that are lost. So I thought I need to remind her where she comes from, who she is, what is her country, her husband, who am I, and everybody else. So in a way, it was a sort of memoir, but for her, only the things that would interest her.
Well, today, we hear about Isabel's journey to look after her daughter. First spending a year at her bedside, and then in keeping her memory alive. Isabel, thank you for joining us here today. I have so many questions that I want to ask you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
But before that, you have a reading for us from your book to your daughter. Would you like to read it to us now?
Yeah. Listen, Paula, I'm going to tell you a story so that when you wake up, you will not feel so lost. Where are you wandering, Paula? How will you be when you wake up? Will you be the same woman? Or will we be like strangers and have to learn to know one another all over again? Will you have your memory? Or will I need to sit patiently and relate the entire story of your 28 years and my 49? When you wake up, we will have months, maybe years, to piece together the broken fragments of your past. Better yet, we can invent memories that fit your fantasies. For the time being, I will tell you about myself and the other members of this family we both belong to. But don't ask me to be precise, because inevitably errors will creep up. I have forgotten a lot, and some of the facts are twisted. There are places, dates, and names I don't remember. On the other hand, I never forget a good story. Sitting here by your side, watching the screen with the luminous lines measuring your heartbeats, I try to use my grandmother's magic to communicate with you. If she were here, she could carry my message to you and help me hold you in this world. Have you begun some strange trek through the sand dunes of the unconscious? What good are all these words if you can't hear me, or these pages you may never read?
Thank you, Isabel. I suppose my first question is, what was Paula like? And what would you want people to remember of her?
She was a unique person in the sense that she was not attached to anything material, and she didn't make plans for the future as if she had always known that she would not live long. So she was very detached from everything that other people cling to. I don't know, even from the point of view of her job, she was a psychologist, but she didn't think of herself as having a career. She didn't want anything material either, so when I went to her closet to pick up some clothes to bring her to California, there were 3 jeans, 5 shirts, a sweater, a coat, and nothing else. So she didn't have anything. She didn't want anything. She was very smart, very cerebral, but very weak emotionally. She would cry easily, get very sentimental. She was very attached to her family and then to her husband, like a great emotional dependency that made her very vulnerable in many ways. And she was full of friends. People loved her. There was something very graceful about her physically, as if she could have been a dancer or something like that.
In the passage that you read from the book, you said you never forget a good story. And from what I've read is your first book, The House of the Spirits, was based on letters written for your grandfather. And then Paula was based on letters written to her. Were you in the habit of writing letters?
I belong to a generation, I'm 80 years old, of people who wrote letters. There was no internet. There was no email. You sent cards. You sent letters. Maybe telegrams if something was really urgent. And my mother was married to my stepfather, who was a diplomat. So we traveled extensively, and I got in the habit of writing to my grandfather, to friends, even to the parents of some of my friends, who would collect my letters. Apparently, as a child, I was a good letter writer. But then, when I was 16, I ended up living in Chile in my grandfather's house, and my mother was in Turkey with my stepfather. And we started writing every day. And we kept the habit of daily writing all our lives. I just needed the daily letter, in which she would tell me about her life, her dreams, her thoughts with my stepfather, what she had bought, what she had eaten. And I would do the same. So in a way, every day was recorded. My mother had beautiful calligraphy because she was taught by the nuns, beautiful calligraphy, and she used the Spanish language beautifully. When I came to the United States and I could finally sort of settle down, I started collecting my mother's letters. So from 1987 on, I have a daily letter from my mother until she died shortly before the pandemic. My son calculated that we have around 24,000 letters in the garage. So if you're asking about letter writing, I'm afraid that I am the expert in this matter.
And that would explain why, even as your grandfather was ill and as Paula was unwell, writing a letter and journaling how you were feeling was like an extension of you.
Yeah, and the habit was so strong that now that I don't have my mother, what I miss the most is the correspondence. It's that connection, that incredible connection.
And obviously, when you did start writing the letters to Paula and the letters between your mother and yourself during that time, what was your intention for them? Did you want Paula to wake up and read them? Did you feel they were more of the journal that was cathartic for you?
No, I wanted her to read it. So I started writing about the things that I thought would be important for her to remember that she might forget, because I was told that people who are in a coma for some time, that when they wake up, they have these big parts of memory that are lost. So I thought I need to remind her where she comes from, who she is, what is her country, her husband, who am I, and everybody else. So in a way, it was a sort of memoir, but for her, only the things that would interest her.
So you were safeguarding her memories. And you talk about your mother, and it's beautiful how many letters and how many words have been shared between the two of you over the years. When you were younger, what was she like?
For me, the feeling always that I was the most important person in my mother's life. I was her best friend, her daughter, and her confidant. So my mother would tell me things that usually mothers don't share with their daughters, about money, about sex, about illnesses, about fights, about frustrations, about her past, about her dreams. And I don't think I was so open with her as she was with me, partly because I didn't want to worry her or hurt her. So if I was sick, I wouldn't tell her, because what was the point? She wasn't around, and why would I worry her? But if she was sick, she would, of course, tell me everything in detail. So, but the correspondence was always very intimate. So the idea was, what we had promised each other was that when she died or when I died, the other one would destroy the letters. But I couldn't do it. When she died, I just could not do it.
Yeah, I feel the same way about my own mother.
With your own mother?
Yes, because I always say she's always made me feel seen.
Seen. And do you have many siblings?
Yes, I do. I'm one of 10.
1 of 10?
Yeah,
Wow.
1 of 10, and she's somehow managed.
She
and I'm
must
not
be an extraordinary person.
She is, she really is. And, just listening to you talk about your own mother it reminds me that I'm really lucky. I'm really lucky to have her.
Yeah, I was lucky too, because I was seen and adored by her.
Just going back to your mom, you can't have been surprised then when she came to you and said, these letters, they need to be a book, and helped pave the way for Paula, the book.
Paula died December 6, 1992. And I started on my books on January 8th. So that would be a month later. And my mother, of course, was with me. And I was a wreck, a total wreck. My daughter had been in a coma for a year. To the last minute, I thought she would live. I was exhausted also and terribly sad. And a feeling of emptiness. When she died, there was nothing to do. All my life had been about caring for her. And suddenly, she wasn't there. And my mom said, "What are you going to write on January 8th? And I said, "Write. The last thing that I can do is write. I feel broken." And my mother said, "No, you're not broken. You have to go back to writing. That will keep you sane. That will keep you alive. You have to write." And so on January 8th, she accompanied me to my office and she said, "You sit here and read this." And I had a notebook with all the letters that I had written to my daughter during her coma. But my mother had kept all the letters I wrote to her, and she gave them back to me. And she said, "Read them. They're in chronological order, and you will understand that the only way out for Paula was death. She was trapped in a body, and her soul needed to fly away." By writing to Paula, as I had begun writing to her in the hospital, plus adding everything I had written to my mother, I could finish this book, which wasn't meant to be a book. It was like something for her husband mostly, because we needed to remember her in many ways. But her husband and my mother, when they read it, they both said, "You have to publish this because this will help many people. Everybody has losses, and you can share this." And so we did. And of all my books, and I have been writing for 40 years, I have written 27 books. Paula is the one that has connected me the most with my readers. I get letters. Paula died 30 years ago, and I get letters constantly. I mean, several a week. of people who mention her or mention the book, either because they read it some time ago and now something is happening that reminds them of the book, or because they want to give it to someone, or for whatever reason.
So I can't imagine how difficult it must have been to write and have to relive that horrible time in your life. But it sounds like it was more of an expression of love and, honoring of her memory that was more important at the time, or what kept you going through.
But also it was very cathartic because by writing, and this happens to me always in life, by writing I understand things better. I see all the angles and I can contain whatever happens within its limits. What had happened to my daughter occupied all my life and my mind, my psyche, my soul. And yet my grandchildren were born at that time. I had a grandson that was not even 2, a granddaughter that had just been born. Then there was another one. My daughter-in-law was expecting another baby. Things were happening. Life was happening, and I couldn't see it. So by writing, I was able to contain my sorrow within the limits of the pages and see, okay, Paula died, and I will miss her horribly, and I will try to live with her spirit. But there's life also, other things that I have to take care of. I have to go back to work. I have to be a grandmother, a spouse, a mother to Nicolas. And the book taught me that, allowed me to understand what had happened and deal with it.
Isabel's letters don't only describe the final year of Paula's life in a coma, but also the family's history, where Isabel's parents and grandparents came from, how Isabel was raising her 2 children, Paula and son Nicolas, in Chile, and how life was turned upside down when General Pinochet came into power after a coup. Isabel decided they had to flee to Venezuela.
The circles of repression were more and more efficient, and I feared for my life and for my children. So eventually I also left. And I went to Venezuela. Venezuela at the time was a rich, hospitable country, open to everybody. Immigrants from all over the world came to work in Venezuela. So there was work, and there was a possibility of getting a visa. So we ended up in Venezuela. And because I work with refugees, and I know it from my own experience, how hard it is to establish a life in another country, because being a refugee is very different from being an immigrant. When you're an immigrant, you have made a decision to leave. You are usually young. You are looking forward to your future. When you are a refugee, you are running away from something. And you are always looking back, hoping to go back to the life you had before. So I think that The House of the Spirits, my first book, is an exercise in nostalgia. It is trying to recover the world I had lost with the military coup. And like many other refugees, and I lived in Venezuela 13 years. In total, 17 years. That's how long the dictatorship lasted. But by the time I could go back to my country, I was married to an American. My children were adults. They would not go back. There was no place for me in my country anymore.
And were you ever able to tell Paula the stories of that time in person? Did you get the chance to tell her about your life in that way?
I took my kids out of their country without explanation. There was no time for explanation. And I think that for years they couldn't quite understand why was it so important to get out and leave behind their home, their bicycles, their grandparents who live next door, their school, friends, everything. Why? And I tried to say, well, it wasn't safe, but it's only when they were adults and they could see documentaries and movies and photographs, and then my stories would make more sense to them.
I was wondering if you have advice for women that would be listening to the podcast, our daughters, what would it be?
Well, not everybody has, like you and me, wonderful mothers. And the relationship between mothers and daughters can be very conflicted. And there are so many books about women who hate their mothers. I even got more than once a letter from a woman saying, after reading your book, Paula, I contacted my mother. I hadn't spoken to her for years and years. And now I understand things that I didn't understand before. And that is wonderful, but it is also very sad to know that some mothers and daughters cannot communicate. You know, I remember having my children inside, giving birth to my children, breastfeeding, the incredible rush of hormones that makes you protect them with your own life, that there's nothing in the world more important than them, that you can hold so much love in your heart. If your children knew how that feels for a woman, maybe they would forgive us our trespasses more and be more tolerant with who we are, as we are tolerant with whom they are. I will say to daughters that, in my case at least, my mother was the most important relationship in my life, the one that started before I was born.
I was just thinking, because I was saying to our producer Charlotte before this, I was trying to get my kids to bed, and today's the day my son just kept saying, "Mommy, I love you," and I was just thinking, would you just sleep? Like, you need to go to bed. I have places to be, and then the guilt checks in 20 minutes later. I'm starting to feel guilty about that, and I do wonder for myself if by the time my child realizes why I did some of the things I did, or the mistakes, the trespasses, will it be too late?
I don't know. It depends on every person, of every case. There are so many things that interfere in a relationship that you are not responsible. You don't control everything. The only thing that you can do is show them as much love as possible and try to understand that they are different from you. They are their own people. And they will do whatever they need to do, and you have to put up with it. Couldn't be two more different people than my son and me. With Paula, I had a lot in common. But my son is an engineer. He has a rational mentality. He's a completely different person from me. And it took him years to understand that when I tell a story, I enhance it, exaggerate, lie. For him, it's a lie. And I said, no, Nico, it's a story. And he says, it's not a story. That's not true. And in time, we have become so close. I could not be closer to anybody than I am to my son, because we have come in time to understand each other and accept each other as we are.
With the podcast, we have found that people are sharing such personal and raw stories, sharing them with the world, but dedicated to their own daughters. And I've just been taken aback by the response that I've had from countries I'd never even heard of, to be honest. And they're really excited, and they really resonate with this idea, which sounds very similar to your book and the experience you had with the response. And I was just wondering why you think this type of medium of sharing is so impactful.
Probably because it's unusual. It's the kind of stuff that we don't share much, and people don't pay much attention. And it's also an art that is being lost. That more and more we talk on the phone, if we talk on the phone, or we send a text message, which is very brief. And the idea of a letter, of communicating our feelings, our lives extensively, it's becoming very rare. And I think people miss it.
Yeah, human connection.
It's a very deep connection. You know, when I think of the love letters that I have written in my life, I'm so embarrassed. That is one thing I wish I had never written.
Maybe someone somewhere has those stashed away.
Oh, Gilbert, You should have a podcast about the love letters, because that's the most embarrassing thing.
Well, thank you so much for chatting to us, Isabel. It's been amazing. It's been really nice, and
well, thank you very much. It was lovely, Namulanta. Really lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been 30 years since Isabel began writing letters to Paula, and they're still resonating with people today. It's about a life shared from growing up to tragic loss. Her letters to Paula and to her own mother have inspired me to keep writing to Coco about the big things and about the little things and about everything in between. It was so great to have Isabel on Dear Daughter and to hear from someone who already had the idea of writing to her daughter. But I'm still keen to hear letters from our listeners. So, if there's something you'd like to write about, why don't you get in touch? Go to bbcworldservice.com/deardaughter. You'll find our privacy notice there as well.